Yo, what's up, everybody? This is Nick Madero with Madero Pest Control in Pueblo, West Colorado. You're listening to the world's #1 pest control training podcast, the Pest Geek Podcast, with the man himself, Mr. Frank Hernandez.
The top 10 concerns coming for 25b's, all on this edition of the Pest Geek Podcast.
Pull out your hose and grab your can. We're about to integrate another Pest Geek podcast. Hi, everybody. Frank Hernandez here, and welcome to the Pest Geek podcast, bringing you the latest information on pests, products, and politics from today's leading industry sources to help you start, manage, and grow your pest control business.
Welcome back. Welcome back to another edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. I am your host, Frank Hernandez, here every day discussing all things pest. I've got on the phone today Dr. Janet Kintz-Early. She is a PhD entomologist who happens to also be a research and development scientist. And she has worked for Nisus Corporation. And now she runs her own consulting service known as JAK Consulting Services, who helps manufacturers bring products to market, complying with all of the EPA and everything that has to be complied with. So she has a ton of experience in doing this. And she's, like I said, she's a PhD entomologist. And we're going to be discussing everything that's coming up in the industry for 25B products and what's ahead and what are the challenges of that are coming up, and that it's going to affect us as PMPs to know this professionally. So before I do that, before I bring her on, I want to discuss. Make sure you join the Pest Geek Society. Listen to us on PestGeekPodcast.com. We're on every single outlet for podcasts. So wherever you are in the world, whether you're using an iPhone product or you're using an Android product, you can have a podcast app, and we're going to be on there. So join also the society at our Facebook group for listeners, Pest Geek Podcast Listeners Group, and also on Pest Geek Podcast on Facebook. So search us out, and we're currently, making the website a better experience. We're trying to really work really hard on that. It's a tough challenge there, but we're going to make that happen for you. And without further ado, I want to welcome Janet to the podcast. Hey, Janet, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Oh, no, it's a pleasure. I mean, I was like reading your post of what you were going to be introing. You were doing a conference. And what was that conference about? What were you doing there?
I think I've lost track. I've been to several this year already. So I've been to, I think the one that you're mentioning would be, I spoke about 25B's in Nebraska.
Yes.
Yeah. So at that particular meeting, there's a lot of interest across the country, really, in, what's going on with 25B's. And I like to talk about, what they actually are, how they came to be. I think it helps. Whenever you're going to use something, I think helps to understand the background behind it.
Right. So yeah, 'cause that's a big issue. I've gotten into 25B many years ago and doing work. First of all, let's give a little bit about your background, because you have experience in something that is dear to my heart, which is plant healthcare and IPM with horticulture, which many people don't have and most people don't care. When I talk about it. So right there, I mean, it was just that, that I can understand and somebody understands me for a change, that you started out in your career, when you were, I guess, in, what is this, your master's or your PhD?
I started out, undergrad looking at ornamental pests. Yeah.
Okay. So, and this was at what, Villanova University? And the arboretum. Explain to people what an arboretum is, or arboretum. I think I got that misspelled or mispronounced.
Yeah. It's an arboretum, and so basically it's like a tree museum, more or less, of living trees. And so what happened was, while I was in working on my bachelor's degree, I went to a real small school, and it was kind of one of these newfangled ideas. Let's make our students have senior research projects. And I was with a bunch of students going to medical school, and it just, man, when I took physiology and I saw the exploded skull, I just went, No. Lost all interest. I didn't care the names of the pieces of the sinus. I just didn't. And I want to do something I can hold and touch and love and feel. So, I was working as a waitress, and I was working with someone who, for fun, had a tree nursery. And I said, I've got to have a senior research project. Do you have something that, bothers you that I could, that something with your tree nursery that I could do? And it was just completely out of left field.
Wow.
And, and her name was Robin. And she said, I do. I have these things called bagworms and eastern tent caterpillars. And I went, well, that sounds pretty cool. And that just launched me into entomology. And, I grew up in Pennsylvania, and that's where I was at the time. And the Cooperative Extension Service, they were my first mentors in that, in addition to my own research advisor at Ursinus. And it just launched me into the whole world of plant health care and insects and how real it is to us. And I just loved being outside. And then I'm not a traditional student as far as learning goes. So the more I can touch and feel something, the faster I learn.
So that's a really odd one, because you went from not being able to deal with brains to bugs, which most women can't deal with either. So I'm really confused at this point. Oh yes, no brains, but bugs are cool. I can deal with that. It's real. That one's a head scratcher. But I guess the plants were more attractive to you than the bugs, right? You were more interested in the plants at the time.
It wasn't a gross out factor. I just lost all interest.
Yeah.
I just naming the bones and the sinuses. I just no.
Yeah. No. I've interviewed a lot of college students in entomology, and they were originally going into some field of medicine, which is really interesting because that keeps coming up. They were going into some field of medicine, and they figured out they couldn't deal with certain aspects of it, and or another type of science, and they decided to go with entomology. So that's pretty interesting. And so you finished up there. You worked at Longwood Gardens there, and so what's going on with all that? I mean, you seem to be like just keep going in that area and in turf and ornamental.
Yeah, well, so I ended up at Longwood Gardens because of the Pennsylvania Cooperative Extension Service.
Okay.
And I said, I'm not really ready to go on and go back to school. I wanted to work, but I felt like it's hard to get work with a bachelor's degree. It's especially just biology, because it's so broad and so not helpful in so many ways. So I said I need some hands-on experience, and I want to know if this is really what I want to do.
Right.
So I said, I need an internship. What have you heard of? And they said, well, there's this program at Longwood Gardens, and I don't know if you've heard of Longwood Gardens, but it's like the Disney World of gardens.
Wow.
It's incredible. It was originally owned by the DuPonts, and it was like their private residence for a while, and they loved gardening, and it ended up being, almost it's a privately owned arboretum and gardens, basically. And they owned over 1,000 acres.
Wow.
About 500 of it is on display, 5 acres under glass. And they had a huge student program, and they had people from all over the world. It was a paid internship, which was, not terrible. It's not terribly common even now. They put us up in dorms. So we had co-ed dorms, full kitchens, so we could feed ourselves. We could walk to work, and we got to work with some of the world's best gardeners.
Wow.
It was an amazing place to be. And I worked under Dr. Bruce Stewart at that time, and I was there for 13 months, and it was an amazing, incredible experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Yeah, no, that would be really, really neat. I mean, it's just, I get to deal with nurseries down here and talk to a lot of cultivators and stuff. And I just think that's what keeps me in the pest control business, because I do a lot of roach stuff, but I keep getting called back to the plant stuff. Everybody knows me for plants, and I'm not really good with lawns. I'm more, with my experience has been mostly with ornamental plants, and it's just fascinating to me. And I keep wanting to get out of it to do something else, but it keeps like just sucking me in. It's like I can't, it's like the Hotel California. I can't seem to get out of it. Everybody's calling me all the time about this plant or that plant, and it's just, that's what just keeps me going. But and it is, I mean, to me, that's the exciting part about pest control, because most of the time we're killing something, but we're not making anything beautiful. Once we're done and we get rid of the pest in people's homes, it's like we're not needed anymore. That's the way. You're done. Thank you for this. Taking care of our problem. We're done. But with plants, it's like it's never ending. It's always a challenge. If it isn't a disease, it's a deficiency. It's an insect problem. And we're making things beautiful. We take a garden that was like decimated, and all of a sudden we restore it back in a period of time. And there's a sense of satisfaction that you don't get with just much of the pest control that we do, where we're killing something. We're either getting rid of a rodent, or it's just different to me. So that right there has been my motivation to keep doing what I'm doing. But now you go from you get into research development, and I guess you end up at Clemson University, and you, okay.
So I go to Clemson. I go to Clemson because of my ornamentals background, and I start out with azaleas and azalea lace bugs.
Okay.
And I was working under Dr. David Alverson, and I remember going out to his offices for the first time, and he says, now, and I'm from Pennsylvania, so, you throw me into the upstate of South Carolina, I'm in shock as it is. I mean, I grew up halfway between New York City and Philadelphia, and throw me into the upstate of South Carolina. Yeah, so, it's farm country, but still, a strong influence from two major cities.
Right.
And you throw me into Clemson, South Carolina, and it's a small town, but boy, the culture is different. And my advisor says to me, so this room over here is the fire ant lab. And I went, what the devil is a fire ant lab? And I'm thinking, why would anybody want to study that? So,
right. Yeah.
It just goes to show, as soon as you start to mock something, well, that's where I ended up for my PhD, studying fire ants.
Oh my goodness.
So it was just, it seems odd. I guess looking back, it seems odd, but it seemed like a very natural transition to go from ornamentals into fire ants, because I was looking at fire ants in turf grass, and I wanted to know, because they're kind of a blight on a golf course if you get a big old fire ant mound. So again, I think the visual part played into it for me originally. The stinging part, not so much fun, but and once I was in that, then I was surrounded by so many amazing urban entomologists, Pat Zingoli and Eric Benson, and a bunch of other amazing people at Clemson. But, it was hard to not tag along when they said, hey, we've got these termites in the roof of a warehouse. You want to go see? And sure, let's go see that. And so, next thing I knew, I slid from ornamentals into structural pest control. It was so easy to do. You're right. There's not as much visual feedback and positive reinforcement, but the struggles are real, and I still know you're really helping somebody, even if the visual feedback isn't there. So I mean, while I was there, ornamentals and fire ants, and just cutting my teeth on what real research was, and kind of learning what my niche would be in the world, because I knew that I didn't want to work in academia, and I knew that I wasn't a traditional scientist. I knew I fell somewhere in between, and I really thought my track would end up being extension, because it is such an amazing bridge between research and education.
Yes.
And so, that was kind of my next step when I was finishing up at Clemson with my PhD, was how do I do something that fits that middle road for me, where I can do research, but I can also do education. And that's how I ended up in my next position after Clemson.
No, that's funny, because I really do appreciate, most people don't know what the Extension Service does. They're like this obscure branch of the government. And I really do, because I do a lot of work with the extension people down here. I teach there and I help a lot. And it really is useful to us to know what extension people do and how important that work is. And most people don't either understand it or appreciate it. And I think it goes underappreciated. But this is awesome because there's a lot of people that probably have kids that are probably, listening to this and going, geez, what is my kid going to do? Where are they guided? And I think that this field, it opens up a lot of doors for people that don't have these traditional, sets of what exactly they're going to do. And I think it's vital to try to help people into these careers. And I've done a lot of youth counseling and stuff. So to me, that's also important that, to use this as a tool to, hey, I'm trying to guide people. Hey, this might be a viable option for you. If you're not, if you're into science and stuff that, it's a pretty neat field that you should look at it. So, so now you finished. What is a research and development scientist, by the way?
So, well, I hadn't even finished my PhD when I started job hunting. Figured that was a smart move. And I'd heard about a position at Nisus Corporation.
Okay.
And I basically stalked them. And I remember being, I know you talked to Harry, Brian a lot. And
yes.
And I remember stalking Harry and him standing there thinking, you're just going to stand here and wait. And I said, yes, sir, I am. I'm going to stand here and wait until somebody looks at my resume.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So Harry remembers me way back when, but so Nisus hired me just before I finished my PhD, and I was hired as a research and development scientist. So I was there to help support, the R&D department, to help them, look at the products they had, find ways to, improve them, add claims to them, help develop new products, and help educate, because that was one of the incredible things about working at Nisus was their education's important to them. And, that was important to me. So it was a good fit. So that's how I started out there. I spent quite a few years in the R&D department, working with them, learning about manufacturing, learning about 4-8, just learning about how to take what I learned in school and make it something that was actually useful in the real world, which, sometimes that can be a pretty big jump.
Yes. Yeah, I know all about that one.
Yeah. And as I was there, it helps being in a smaller company. You get to kind of identify gaps and needs. And I drifted into regulatory affairs, learning about writing labels and working with EPA, going to EPA, working with the states, learning about all those rules and regulations. And so, I kind of drifted into another really fascinating field, not as fun as science, but certainly extremely challenging.
Right. I could imagine the stuff that you have to go through to make sure you comply with every agency that's involved, not just the EPA. That must be like just brain racking.
Well, I've listened to your podcast and I've heard you struggle with, interpreting label language and things like, what's a spot treatment, and it's the same thing on that end of, we struggle with the same thing. What are those definitions and what do they mean? And how do we make the challenge is always how do you make the research, because the research dovetails with the regulatory. So the research has to fit the label. Mm-hmm. The label has to fit within the regulations, and federal law, and you have to know how the research, you have to know what they need so that they can approve a claim. And, there's a lot of misunderstanding out there about what data is and isn't needed to get a product registered. Right. And it's not easy. And, if it's a public health claim, it must have data, whether it's rodents or mosquitoes or roaches. Even bed bugs are pretty well regulated now as far as the type of data that comes in. And, I've seen lots of CEUs where they talk about how much it costs to produce a product. And And a lot of it, there's so much brain power that goes into how do I create, and I don't want this to sound the wrong way, but you have to create the studies that EPA wants. And you have to create the study that fits the label and the way the product will actually work. So, you know, EPA dictates what they want, and you've got a label, and you've got to figure out how to dovetail them all together. And, you know, that can be pretty tough.
Yeah, no, I do. The reason I do a lot of studies is, and I do a lot of studies in the podcast, and I bring them up, is because in what I've discovered from the studies that get published about everything what I need to know, is that it gives me a benchmark for me to start testing, to learn. It doesn't provide me the ins and outs of how to actually perform that service or how that product works. And a lot of people, believe it or not, and I think this is an important thing to discuss, because a lot of people in the industry, especially technicians, who are not science driven, have big beefs with studies, that they're bogus, that the studies are, like you do a study where you test, 1,000, you interview 1,000 people. Well, there just wasn't enough people in that study. So the study's bogus because they should have interviewed 100,000 people, not 1,000. Things like that people don't understand the what's required to actually perform it, and so they don't appreciate it. They don't appreciate the studies. They see them as useless. And to me, those have been the benchmarks for me to test.
Right.
It doesn't give me the answers. It gives me the questions that I need to ask, and then the things that I need to do in the field to test and basically do my own research and development as a technician to figure it out. And so, what have you experienced in the whole, bringing this thing together, trying to bring the company that makes the product, the EPA that wants these studies, and the technician in the field that, has no clue of what's going on. He just needs to kill this bug.
Yeah, and that's tough. I mean, and you're right. It's hard to bridge that gap. And research has to start somewhere, right? So, I mean, you start with something in house in a lab, and you go, am I like, and that's, JAK, my consulting firm, that's one of the things that we do. I like to call them quick and dirties, but it's that starting point. We say, okay, you've got a product, you think it works. Let's do some really simple stuff. And, it's not going to be terribly complicated, but, you think this product attracts mosquitoes. Well, I'm going to throw some buckets on my front porch in my new house. And, what my neighbors all know who moved in, so they don't question it. Yeah, of course, it's only been a few months, so they really don't know what they've
right.
put up with yet. But I've just begun. So you have a starting point, and so for under $1,000, I run a quick and dirty, and we say, let's see what this looks like. And I say, yeah, I think you got something. Let's move on to the next step, and let's do something that EPA can actually look at. Or, yeah, I think we might need to go back to the drawing board. It's not doing what you think it is. Either I'm not testing it the right way for how you want to use it. Let's see if I misinterpreted your intention for the product, or it needs to be tweaked somehow. So let's go back and look at that. So now, as my own consulting firm, that's what I try to do, is help companies with that starting point. Once they get through the part with EPA, you're right, there's still that real world aspect to start to fold in. And sometimes the data of the EPA covers some real world, and sometimes it does not. And that's where, when you do those studies that go to EPA, you need, at some point, you need to do studies that control many different things that are happening, what a scientist would call a variable. So temperature, wind, competing food sources, places to hide. You want to minimize as much of that as possible
right.
in the beginning, because otherwise you don't know if something works, or if it doesn't work, you don't know why. So you have to narrow things down as much as possible so you can figure out why does it or does it not work. And then when you get past that hurdle, you go, yep, it definitely works. That's when you start to challenge it. And you go, okay, if I have competing food sources, is it still good enough? And that's not going to be necessarily something that EPA needs to see. That's something that a company is going to do as part of their marketing, to say, yes, we've answered those questions for you. So Is it the same as an EPA type of study? No, that doesn't necessarily mean it's not any less valid. But the intent of answering those questions and how they might go about that will be different. So there's different types of research for different purposes. And I believe, as a scientist, I believe you need all of those. You need those intro studies to say, do I or don't I have something? You need the studies that are controlled as much as possible to say I am or I am not onto something. And then you need the ones that say, okay, I'm going to challenge this now. And sometimes that comes out of the universities where they challenge a product and they say it's not working. And the beauty of those studies is, for a manufacturer, that's frustrating because they go, all they're doing is beating me up. But what they're also doing is saying, this is the real world and everything has a limitation. And, their job is to help look at when is it not going to work? And it may not be the product's fault. It may be application or misuse of, not following the directions, or there could be a lot of reasons why a university study says, yeah, it's not working. And that's hard for the technician to start to peel that apart. And I think that's where, folks like myself come in and can educate and say, here's the value of this study. Here's what it's telling you. That doesn't mean it doesn't work. It just means that in this circumstance, it's not going to perform as well as it could if you did it this way.
Yeah. So, and one of the things is the in vitro studies. When you do an in vitro study, people are like, well, it's just they totally disavow it because it wasn't done in a real world situation. It was done in a lab. Lab studies are not the real world. And I think, a lot of people in the pest control industry have issues with that. And you have to, how do you differentiate between, yes, that is an in vitro study. Yes, they proved it kills it. But do you totally, do you throw out the baby with the bathwater at this point and say, no, that it has no value? And that's where most people have an issue with in vitro study. They don't understand what has to happen and why the purpose of that has to be done in a lab. And so, can you explain a little bit on that, these issues between, doing field studies and doing in vitro studies and both have to be done, but, what gives there?
Right. So the lab study, the whole point of it is you do want to create that perfect situation where there is no competing food source and there's no extra harborage or place to hide. You want to minimize all the external factors, all those variables, all those things that might interfere with the performance of the product. And your laboratory study is your chance to do that. It's a chance to say, does this product work in a perfect environment, or as perfect as you can make it in the lab? Even then, you can't always control things. And that's the purpose of it. And it has its place because there's no point spending $16,000 on state registrations and thousands of dollars on federal registrations and renewals if the product doesn't work at all. So, it's a starting point, and it just says I'm onto something and it does work or it doesn't. And so it definitely has a purpose, and it also tells you what conditions it does need to work. So, if I do a lab study and I show, that I've got this bait and it works great with ham as my carrier for my toxicant, but it doesn't work with, tuna, then that tells me a lot of information. And then when I go in the field, if I test it again, I might come up with the same results and I might not. And that's the fascinating part is, and I think probably also, fascinating for me as a geeky scientist,
right.
But, for a technician, I think that is very confusing. And it goes to show that, a lab is a starting point. Field studies, you start to add in those other variables of what is happening and why is it happening. And it could be something as simple as, maybe in the lab when there's nothing else, the ham is perfect. But when and I'm just pulling stuff out of thin air as far as examples go here. Don't take me literally. But maybe you get out in the field and for whatever reason, because tuna smells more, it overcomes competing food sources. And so suddenly it's the better choice. So, sometimes that information can be conflicting, and it can be very confusing to the end user. And so, you have to look at lab studies are of great value. They tell you a product can work, and then the field studies start to tell you what circumstances it might not. And so there's a happy medium somewhere between the lab study and the field study, and one field study doesn't equal every single scenario you're going to see out in the real world either. So,
right.
And then there's the whole complication of it's not the product that failed, it's how it was used. So, it's an incredibly complicated question.
Yes. No, I mean, I get it. Because, I mean, you got these scientists that tested these things and kept perfect records of everything they did. And then this is handed to 15 different technicians with all different skill sets and experiences and geography and structures. And, the variables are just, hundreds and hundreds of different variables. To be able to decide whether it works or not. And I think it helps us understand there's always that, the academics don't understand us. That's always the thing is they live in another world. We're in the real world. We're out there battling these pests, and division. I encounter that working with the extension service. They're just there to enforce laws, and they don't understand what we do, and everybody's trying to bring that together with people to we don't necessarily agree, but at least we can understand and appreciate each other more of what everybody's role is in this. That without you guys getting all this done first, we wouldn't even have a product.
Right. You got to start somewhere. You got to start somewhere.
Yeah, so I mean, we'd be ending up with flip-flops and squashing bugs if all this wasn't done and all this wasn't available. So I think there just needs to be a little appreciation there for the work everybody does.
Absolutely, and the extent there's so many, and academia. I mean, they get a bad name, and sometimes I'm there with you, and sometimes not. There's some really incredibly talented people out there who really get it.
Right.
But they're there to provide a service too. And so they're there to challenge it from their angle and their perspective, and they're doing a service too. And it is confusing, but when you step back and you look at the big picture of the manufacturer's type of data and what their purpose is, and an extension person and their type of data and what their purpose is, and then your perspective on it, they all dovetail together in one way, not necessarily perfectly linked, but they all serve a purpose, and
right.
We need all those checks and balances in there.
Yeah. So I mean, I totally agree. And I thank you for that, because, part of what I want to do is bring everybody together on this to, you bring the best minds together to get things done, and you create an amazing team, even if, you're not working directly together. So I definitely do appreciate it. Getting to your topic of what you did and what triggered this conversation, which was the issue of 25b's, and I've said it for a long time, and you see the writing on the wall because of the abuses, because of the empty promises, because of the things that people over exaggerate and marketing does. And I'm a marketer, and marketers mess things up for a lot of people. When they start making unsubstantiated claims, they are boasting about products, and one of the things that isn't highly regulated in this industry at all, pretty much, I mean, it's pretty much like the Wild Wild West sometimes, is 25B products. And and I've been a user of 25B. I use it extensively in my ornamental care business, and I know the limitations. I know what I can promise my client, and I know that there are things, but I see it all the time. This product kills ants, and it repels snakes and rodents and bears. And if you put it in, and if you wear it, I mean, if you put it behind your ears, you will attract the right mate. I mean, you will get married within 10 months. I guarantee it. So this is the stuff that we're dealing with, and I know sooner or later the states are gonna tighten up, and the EPA is gonna take 25Bs and start putting some more regulations on. And then it makes it harder for everybody else that wants to enter the game. And so tell me the history of it. What's been going on with 25Bs? Where are we going? What's the whole issue there?
Okay, so 25b's they're an interesting little niche, and what happened was, back in 1996, EPA said, there are some products that just aren't very high risk, or they're virtually no risk to human health or the environment. And notice I say the word risk, and I know you've talked about risk on your podcast. I don't use the word safe. Safe is a 4-letter word. We don't use that word. It's on my client's no list for my manufacturing registrants. And so in 1996, they said there's just some products that we don't need to spin our wheels on. And so we're going to go back to FIFRA, the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act. And we're going to look at the Section 25B of FIFRA, and that's where 25B products comes from. It's from FIFRA. And we're going to say that these products that are low to no risk fall under that exemption of 25B FIFRA. So technically, they're called minimum risk pesticides for EPA, not 25Bs, but we all call them 25Bs.
Right.
So what happens is EPA said, looking at the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, which is basically a law, we're going to say that these products are completely exempt from that law. That doesn't mean they aren't regulated; they just aren't wrapped up under FIFRA. So when they're not wrapped up under FIFRA, a few interesting things happen. One, they don't have to be submitted to the Environmental Protection Agency for review, either for content or for efficacy. And so they fall through a gap there, in my opinion. So basically, EPA said because it's low risk, we're just not going to waste our time and money reviewing them. But in the process, they left this huge walking giant hole for companies to walk through, or especially unscrupulous marketers, to say, let's make some health claims, and federal government can't do a thing about it. And that's, I think, where 25Bs get an unfortunate bad name. What's frustrating about all this is it leaves the burden on the states to do the regulation. And there are regulations in place federally, but the federal government doesn't do a whole lot of enforcement. But there are some very basic things they must do. They must have one or more of 31 options for an active ingredient. So they can't put in anything they want. One of the new things that are new-ish things coming down the pipeline is next year, companies will not be allowed to make a claim in a 25B that they're using mint oil anymore. It will have to which is one of the 31 things they can use as an active ingredient. They're now going to have to say that it's corn mint oil. What that does is it cuts out spearmint oil. So there are certain things like that EPA is coming down and saying we're going to demand you're more specific. The next thing they do is they say you can't put just any old inert ingredient in there. You've got a list to choose from. And that list is a little more extensive, but still falls under the, little to no risk to humans or the environment. And it's things like bone meal and granite, auger, beeswax. There's a variety of things on there, but you cannot make a 25B or minimal risk pesticide with anything not on those lists, with one exception. And that would be if it's a commonly consumed food commodity. So if I want to make something, say, with peppermint oil, and I want to use, I want to use olive oil in it as an inert ingredient, I can do that even though it's not on the approved list because it's a commonly consumed food commodity. Now, if I want to pick some kind of random essential oil that's not commonly consumed, I can't find it on a grocery store shelf to cook with, then it doesn't count.
Gotcha.
So that's an interesting little quirk that, you can go and you can look at this giant list of inert ingredients and you go, wait a minute, they've got olive oil and I don't see that on the list. Well, that falls under that whole commonly consumed food commodity. So there's a tiny little bit of leeway off of that inert ingredient list. And the next thing is, you can't apply 25b's just everywhere and anywhere. You can't apply it in a, food processing facility unless it has a tolerance exemption for everything in it.
Okay.
So, so you've got to have a tolerance exemption for foods that you're going to put, on or near food or animal feed.
Okay, so that includes like restaurants, or that's just like processing?
No, it's going to be anything food, animal feed, just like regular pesticides.
Okay.
It's gotta, and the list of active ingredients that EPA has, it'll say whether it's approved for food use or not.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so that's on their list. And the next thing is, I like to call it the no mystery ingredients. On a traditional pesticide, you'll look at the ingredients on the label, and it'll show it the active ingredient, and then it'll say either other or inert ingredients. And that's all it says for that part. And the total has to equal 100%. So you say I've got 10% of active ingredient XYZ, and I've got inert ingredients at 90%, and that totals 100. With the 25b's, you have to divulge not only the percentage of active ingredients, but you also have to divulge all of your inert ingredients, even if it's water. You don't have to say how much of each inert ingredient you're using, but you do have to divulge it.
Gotcha.
So that's what's different between a traditional registered pesticide and a 25b, is all inert ingredients must be listed.
Gotcha. Okay. And because I know that they're using, like even with, like you said, mint oil. There's different, especially in the cedar oil market. Cedar oil tends to be the one that started it all, and it's been targeted. And so there's, you got cedar oil from Virginia, you got cedar oil from Texas. Which cedar oil did you use? So there's the CAS number attached to all those products. That is, if I'm understood that correctly, that those are going to have to be used to describe which one you used. Also, the CAS number must be on there, or no? Because I know it's on, and it has the S's.
It can be on there. It does not have to be, but
Gotcha.
You do have to divulge the source. So it's Virginia, Texas, and China are the choices for the cedar wood oil.
Right.
And it can no longer say cedar oil. It will now have to say cedar wood oil.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm not exactly sure why that's such an important distinguishment, but regardless, it's what the new requirements will be.
Gotcha. Okay.
So the next thing is you have to prominently display the company making the product and their contact information. Now, that seems probably fairly obvious, but they're trying to, on a traditional registered pesticide, you're going to have an EPA establishment number and a manufacturer name, or it'll say manufactured for, or sold by, or distributed by, something of that sort to identify the product. On these products, since they're, in these gray areas, the regulations say they have to say, who they are making it. There's no establishment number to back it up, but they do still have to divulge who they are. The next thing, and this goes into the marketing part that you mentioned, is they still can't make any false or misleading statements. And that includes things like chemical free. From a pure science perspective, these are all chemicals. Water is a chemical. There's no such thing as non-chemical or chemical free. So they're not allowed to make claims like that. They can't make ridiculously broad statements. So they can't say kills all insects. They have to narrow it down.
Gotcha.
They also can't in any way imply endorsement or safety by a federal agency. So they can't say it's been recommended by EPA or recommended by USDA. they can't lump any agency into it specifically saying that they've been approved in some way or determined to be safe or anything like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
They also can't make any health claims. So I can say, product abracadabra kills ticks. I can't say product abracadabra kills ticks that carry Lyme disease.
Okay.
Or mosquitoes that transmit Zika. I can say it kills mosquitoes.
And we see that we see that all the time in the field. And we see it on, that's one of the things that it gets confusing because we see it all the time. We see it on websites.
Yes.
Because it's not on their product, it's on people's websites. And it's not on the label, it's on the website. So people are, marketers understand the association. So that's been the thing where I got challenged by an attorney. Just to give you an example, he says, well, you claim your product is organic. And I said, no, I don't. Read my entire website. It's right on the front center where we are the natural and organic leader. And we also do, but only on these 3 products, we do organics. And we use an integrated pest management process. We reduce risk and minimum risk products. We're not telling you we are an organic pest control company. And actually the lawyer is a client. So
wow.
Yeah, so we're very careful about that we put it up front and center that hey, we have 5 OMRI certified, that have certificates. These products have OMRI certificates. We're not making misleading claims. We have OMRI certified, but we can't use those products indoors to control your pest. These are for plant pests. People thinking, we're going to be able to use these products indoor. They're not labeled for indoor. They're for mosquitoes. They're for, aphids. They're mealybugs. They're garden pests, but not for roaches. We're not claiming these are for roaches. And we have an integrated pest management process that we detailed extensively how we do it. So I see that all the time. And it's like you read a website and it's like my biggest beef, and a lot of people have this beef, and I know we're going to get to it, is safe. That's one of the words that just drives me insane in reading these products that they claim they're safe, and that's a big issue. So go ahead and keep going because I know we're gonna run. We're gonna step on somebody's toes here, on a lot of people's toes, and we're gonna bust a lot of bubbles that people have. And, go ahead.
We'll have to have a whole different one on just marketing claims and things like safe, because that's a whole nother rant for me. Okay, so I'll try to not go off on a tangent. So let's go off because it's so easy. Let's talk about state registrations in 25b's a little bit.
Okay.
So federally they have these regulations in place, but they're not doing a whole lot to enforce them. They're leaving that up to the states more or less, and the states say, okay, you've got these regulations in place, but we're also going to have our own, and if we want to make things more stringent, we will. And so although they would like the federal government to be more involved, they're not making a whole lot of progress on that right now.
Okay.
So most of the states, 40 of them to be exact, 40 of the states do register 25B pesticides. And notice I do call them pesticides. They're still a pesticide. They're just federally exempt from registration. But most of the states register them just like they would a traditional pesticide. Some states like to really drag their feet on the registration. And for you guys, that's not necessarily a big deal. But for manufacturers, that's incredibly difficult because it makes shipment and distribution extremely challenging when companies or states take 6 months to get a label through. There's a handful of states that say that they want the exact list of the ingredients. So everything's listed on the label, but not all the percentages. So some of the states say they want what's called a confidential statement of formula, CSF for short. And so many of the states, there's about 7 of them that want to see that confidential statement of formula. And so they're going to look at it and make sure that everything on your list is actually allowed, and they're going to put it in their records. And they sometimes they challenge things that are in there, and sometimes they don't. The next thing is the states are saying, even though federally you're not required, the states are saying we want the KUROC statement, the keep out of reach of children, and a signal word, specifically caution, on the labels. Federally not required, states are requiring it. States are not allowing someone to say that they're organic or, USDA claims. If you're going to do that, you're going to have to be able to back it up. And like you said, it's going to have to, if it's something like OMRI, something to that effect, you're going to have to go through their certifications, and it's going to have to fit perfectly. You're not going to be able to have, for example, there are products that are allowed for structural use, right, to protect the structure, even within the NOP guidelines. If you have uses that don't fall into that, then the label's broader than the claims allowed for an NOP claim, and you can't have it.
Yeah, and with NOP, so people understand what the NOP is, it's the National Organic Program. But isn't that mostly agriculture? Very little on there is actually structural?
There's not a whole lot, but it is there.
Yeah. Yeah. I know they allow for like boric acid to be used, even though boric acid is not organic. It's allowed in the NOP, and people are like, well, boric acid is organic. I said, no, boric actually is not organic. It's allowed. Right. And so, we're getting into all this, semantics. But, so that's what that is the national. And then, I know the OMRI certificates are very strict, because to get those, they have to go through, what OMRI considers to get those certificates and become OMRI certified.
Right.
So I'm always happy to use OMRI products, because I know that, it's been validated, whatever's on that product. And that's why I recommend the use of those. Go ahead.
Yeah. And I've gotten products through OMRI, so I can tell you it's rigorous. Okay. So the next thing is, some states say, prove to us that these 25b's work. And there's 4 right now, and things change. So tomorrow it could be 3 or it could be 10. It changes all the time. But right now there are 4 states, and they are Indiana, New Mexico, Mississippi, and South Dakota. And so you have to turn in data for them to show the product does or does not work. There's only one state that makes life extremely difficult as far as the efficacy data goes, and that is New Mexico. New Mexico says not only do you have to turn in efficacy, but we want it to be double blind. In other words, the manufacturer is going to send it to the study director with a code on it that you don't know what it is, and then the study director is going to recode it to the people who are actually using it, so they don't know what it is either. And then they also want 2 independent peer reviews. What this means in a nutshell is there's absolutely no 25b's registered in New Mexico.
Interesting.
I just went last week and went through every single active ingredient on the 25b allowed list for active ingredients, and there was nothing registered in New Mexico.
Wow. Okay, now let me ask you this. When we talk about registration now, because I see 2 things happening. Florida has and I ran into this problem with a manufacturer. They require products to be registered, every product. It doesn't matter whether it's 25b, it doesn't matter if you're selling water. If it's used for pest control, it has to be registered. But there's companies making it here, selling it here directly to the consumer, and the consumer can use it and apply it. Yet, if for us to apply it, it requires that it be labeled in the state. Is that same thing that they're doing now on everything that's gonna get used in that state with a chemical that can be brought in, shipped, or whatever, or just for a professional to apply it?
Okay, so in my professional opinion, if you are marketing a product that makes a pesticidal claim, it controls, mitigates, in any way, a pest, it is a pesticide.
Right.
I don't care if you're selling it to a professional to apply it commercially or to a homeowner who's applying to their own home. It is still a pesticide, and therefore it is not exempt from a state or federal registration. So I mean, in my professional opinion, they're slipping through the cracks, but they technically are still a pesticide and would still have to be registered under a state if they're a 25B and the state requires registration.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
So in my professional opinion, that would be illegal.
Gotcha. So you're opening up yourself to any possible problem. Because I know that there's already been, the federal government actually already brought lawsuits against several manufacturers, and from the from the FTC side, not from the EPA side. Is that
right?
Is
FTC.
That, yeah. So that's a whole. See, you're not just dealing with the EPA, but it's just the EPA. The EPA, no, FTC is going. The Federal Trade Commission says, your claims aren't good, and we can sue you, and you're opening up yourself for that one. So I know that's been an issue with a couple of products that we've been recommended to use, and they've already been sued and lost.
Yeah,
and lost.
Right, and that's where so the division becomes if someone is selling a pesticide and it's not registered, or they're making pesticidal claims, that would fall under enforcement through EPA or the states. In that case, and for your specific example, the state of Florida would have to go after the manufacturer and say, you're selling a pesticide, we require registration. So Florida, in your example, Florida would have to go after them specifically and say, you're breaking our laws and regulations, and you have to be registered here. FTC is going to specifically look at claims. So that's where websites come in, or crazy claims on labels. And that's what's been coming up lately is FTC going after these false and misleading claims. And what I tell my clients is, if you're going to make that claim on your website or your label, can you back it up? If you're going to say it's natural, can you actually prove that it's natural? What's interesting is the state of South Dakota has looked at some of these active ingredients and said, we're not going to allow you to make the claim natural if you have one of the following 6 ingredients. If you have citric acid, lauryl sulfate, malic acid, potassium sorbate, sodium lauryl sulfate, or 2-phenyethyl propionate. They say those have to be manufactured. They're probably almost always synthetic and not from a natural source, and therefore you can't say natural on your label if you contain any of those.
Right.
They're the only state that's done that so far.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that I've looked at on labels. I'm looking at a product that claims it's natural on the shelf, by the way, over the counter. And I'm reading their product label and it says, how the heck they get away with saying this is natural when that product is synthetically manufactured? Right. And that's the misleading stuff that people say, well, I bought this stuff on the counter that's natural. Is your stuff as safe as this? And I'm like, yeah, actually.
Yeah,
it is, because that's not even natural. I mean, so yeah, that I can see that's becoming an issue. And I think I think people don't want the intervention. Nobody wants especially manufacturers. But when you got consumers demanding stuff like I see in the future, they're going to say, I want this type of service, demanding it from a pest control professional. And, because it's safe. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I have to disagree as a professional. And I'm not going to do that because, it's like I have a lady who told me I'm allergic to everything. It says, why do you want me to spray a natural spray in your house if you're allergic to everything? Do you know you have an allergen to this product or not? I mean, do you have Glade plugins? No, I don't. I took them all out because of the fumes. It says, you're asking me to do the same thing. It doesn't make it safe for me to do this for you as a professional.
Right.
So those are the issues that we're going to struggle with. And right now, like I see, it's the wild, wild west. I've been challenged on this before. I bring it up. I get shut down because I bring these issues up and people don't want to hear it, especially from people who want to be, zealots. And I call them, when you're a zealot, and there's a difference between being an evangelist, a zealot, and then you're in a cult. At one point, if you're going to be an evangelist, you better make sure that your Savior resurrected. Because if he didn't, you got a problem. So in zealots, the problem is they take out knives and they cut you. And this is how people are behaving online when you challenge all these issues and these problems, is that they don't want to see the fact. They want this to succeed because natural is the way to go. And I'm saying there's a lot of problems there that we're going to have to address. And, that those are and I'm glad that you're bringing them up, because, you can take the beatings now with me.
And I'm okay with it. And I think, it's understandable that you want to wrap things up in a tiny little box with a pretty red bow.
Yeah.
And make it simple. And it's understandable to want that, because these are complicated things. And so it's nice to want to be able to grab onto something and go, this is going to make me feel safe and secure, and everything's going to be all right. And I think that's a natural desire. Unfortunately, it's not that simple.
Right. Yeah. We're trying to oversimplify or make it simplistic, and it's not. But again, you have to do the marketing to get people to, buy it and demand it. And I get that.
Yeah. And there is a right way and a happy balance. And, to say my product contains peppermint oil, that's fine. And for people who don't have issues with peppermint oil, that's fine. But not everyone's going to be okay with it.
Right.
To assume that because it's peppermint oil and it therefore comes from a natural source and it's safe is not realistic. Just like nicotine's a natural source, but that doesn't make it safe.
Right.
And you pointed out too, you're using this to control a pest in some way. Therefore, it's either a repellent or it's a toxicant. It's either scaring them away in some way, or it's killing them. And by nature, therefore, it's not going to be safe. It's not safe to the pest you're going after.
Yeah. Exactly. No, and when I point out that, like, methyl eugenol, which is used in a lot of products, it's classified as a carcinogen. And so do I want to be spraying this in the air every day without a respirator, exposed to it without a suit constantly, like they do in certain places? And you got a guy walking around in shorts, but methyl eugenol is classified, and a lot of products are classified as carcinogens. So you just can't say I'm spraying and I don't need, any type of protection, because do I want to really inhale that?
Right. And a lot of them cause skin irritation.
Right.
Respiratory irritation, which is why you're with the respirator. Get them in your eye, they're going to be extremely uncomfortable. Those are all very good reasons to wear your PPE.
Yeah. Yeah. No.
And it's, and I don't want a homeowner standing in the room while I'm doing the treatment either.
Right. No. I mean, there's the things that common sense sometimes go out the door with people, and they feel this, warm fuzzies, and just throw all logic out the window because this is supposed to be really natural and really safe. And I think that's been my big beef from the beginning. I mean, that's and then claiming what is safe, claiming it's non-toxic, claiming is it a chemical? You've already said that it's not a chemical. It is a chemical. Anything that by definition is a chemical that is used, whether it's synthetic derived or naturally derived. So yeah, I mean, I think we're gonna see a lot more of this. I think. What do you see coming up that you see talks you hear in the government, things that you might think, hey, guess what? It's going to get a lot tougher for us. What are you seeing there? Because I know you said certain, like New Mexico's gotten really strict. If other states like California, which are very, decide to follow that suit, I mean, that's detrimental to a lot of people's business because of the sheer volume.
Right. Yeah. It's a moving target. States being able to force these things depends greatly on their budget. Mm-hmm. So what they might want to do and what might be able to actually carry through can be two different things. But as a group, the states really truly want more regulation over it. They don't want to be as responsible as they are right now for it because they don't have the budget. As a group, the states would like to be working more cohesively to have regulations in place that are a little more consistent. It's a beast for a manufacturer to keep up with all the different states' requirements. And because it's a moving target, just when you think you got a label that'll make everybody happy, suddenly you don't. It's only going to get harder for the manufacturers to put these products out there. Unfortunately, for the companies that are truly reputable, it's going to make it harder for them to put them out there. But the companies that are unscrupulous are going to still do whatever they want. And that's where 25b's get a bad name, because you've got to sort through who's legitimate and who's not.
Right.
And the states are stuck to the states. It doesn't matter if you're reputable or not. They're still trying to just put their arms around it and control it. I do think it's going to get much more difficult for states to get these products, the regulations through. I think the manufacturers are going to struggle more and more with increasing regulation on the state level. From the PMP side of things, the professional use, I've not heard of any regulations specifically targeting, you as an end user yet. Does that mean that won't happen? No. I think that's probably after they're done trying to regulate the labels themselves. I think that's going to be the next thing. But time will tell. In the next 12 months, things will change dramatically.
Gotcha. All right. Well, all we're going to do is watch, stay ahead of it, and try to understand it, wrap our arms around it, to see, hey, why can't we get this and why can't we get that? And now we understand that, hey, it has to do a lot with individual states, not the EPA. But anything? I have a burning question, because I personally have not experienced this, and I just want to really know. Have you tasted Harry's barbecue?
Oh, yes, I have.
Is it really as good as he claims it is? Because we're talking about claims and, stuff. So I just really want to know, is the barbecue as good as he says?
Oh, it's fantastic. My favorite is his brisket.
Is brisket? I love brisket. I love brisket. I'm going to have to just, figure out how I get myself a pound of that.
It's all really good, but for me, to me, it's hard to find good brisket. So that's my absolute favorite.
Gotcha. Okay, so hey, there we go. I just wanted to confirm that, because I needed to get my mind clear before I go on with the rest of my week, and that was just that just didn't allow me to sleep. I just had to ask you.
I'm sure he'll sell you some on some dry ice.
Oh yeah, I know. I'm gonna have to get some. So hey, thank you so much for being on here, for taking the time, for doing this. I really do appreciate it, and I hope I can have you back sometime in the future with some fresh new stuff. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much.
All right, ma'am. You have a great day.
You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh wait, Janet.
Yeah.
Oh, forgot to get your contact info.
Oh, yeah, that would be good.
Yeah. I was like, oh my God, this is such a good interview.
Yeah, and I'm just a lousy marketer. So Dr. Janet Kintz-Early, and my new website will be up soon, and it is JAK Consulting.com. And my phone number is 865-360-1988. And my email is Janet, Janet, at jakconsultingservices.com. And we do continuing education classes and help manufacturers get their products registered.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great one.
Thank you. You too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Well, we hope you've enjoyed today's edition of the Pest Geek Podcast. And until next time, that means tomorrow, have a pestacular day.
Thank you for listening to the Pest Geek Podcast. If you have enjoyed the Pest Geek Podcast, please give us a rating, write a review, or subscribe to the channel. You can join the Pest Geek Society by visiting pestgeekpodcast.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.